Welcome to the May edition of The Coffee House, where in the next hour, taxpayer subsidies for economic development. When are they sensible spurs to community revitalization? When are they corporate handouts? Also, big league baseball in the area may be a big bore this season, but not the semi-pros. We'll look at sandlot baseball, now and then. Performance poet Lori Tsang goes lunching on Chinese Jamaican cuisine, and Mary Sue Tui sings Rain on Me, Rain on You, while the Lumina Studio rehearses Shakespeare's The Tempest. Plus, the makings of a community newspaper inside the Tacoma Voice, our top 10 lists for CD and book sales, and the song and dance calendar. Hi, and welcome to the Coffee House. Your state and local tax money. It's what runs the schools, pays the police and firefighters, and it's what underwrites a lot of economic development. Some public economic development plans, even expensive ones, are popular, like the revitalization project that will bring to downtown Silver Spring the American Film Institute and Roundhouse Theater, a national bookstore chain, a film and dinner theater multiplex, a civic building, restaurants, and more. The downtown Silver Spring project will cost Maryland and Montgomery County some $321 million, and that does not even include what the county and state are giving Discovery Communications, Inc. to build its new world headquarters in Silver Spring. Despite the hefty price tag, the Silver Spring project is popular because it promises to breathe new life into a struggling community and enhance the overall quality of life in the county. But not all economic development packages are so well received. Take, for example, the deal to keep Marriott International Corporation in Montgomery County. The county and state put together an aid and tax incentives package worth anywhere from $31.7 million to $44.1 million to persuade the $8 billion lodging company not to cross the Potomac from Montgomery to Fairfax County. How much Marriott ultimately will get depends on whether it expands at its current locations in Bethesda or builds a new headquarters in Rockville, and whether it creates a projected new 700 jobs. Marriott currently employs 3,500 people in Bethesda. State officials put the price tag of the Marriott deal at $4,800 to $6,000 per job. But if you divide $44.1 million by the expected 700 new jobs, that comes to $63,000 in public funds and tax benefits per job created. Both the Silver Spring and Marriott deals were championed by Montgomery County Executive Doug Duncan, who we met up with at a groundbreaking for the new Freshfields and Straus-Snyder's hardware stores in Silver Spring. I asked him to compare the Silver Spring and Marriott deals.
Well, in terms of this particular development, there is a lot of public money going into it, but it's going into things like parking garages, utility work, infrastructure work. I mean, those are public benefits, they're public costs that we'd have in any kind of redevelopment. And we had to work very hard. The private sector alone was not going to come in here and turn around Silver Spring. We had to share in the cost of that. The Marriott deal was one that it's a company that's world known. It's got 4,000 employees in the county. I mean, it's very important for our economic future that we be able to keep a company like Marriott here. And we were able to work a deal with them so that as we get increased tax revenues from Marriott, they get back a little bit of that. So it's a good deal for us. We're getting a lot more new tax revenue than we're giving up. And in Silver Spring, when you look at the total cost of the project, the new tax base that's created here is going to pay the county taxpayer back a lot more than just leaving it vacant.
Maryland Senator Paul Pinsky thinks there's a big difference between the Silver Spring and Marriott deals. The former is targeted at rebuilding a community. The latter he views as corporate welfare. Pinsky represents the 22nd District in Prince George's County, places like Hyattsville, Cheverly, and New Carrollton. Did the county and the state get rolled by Marriott?
Absolutely. Anytime a company is playing two states off against each other for a better deal, I think the net result is they're going to gain more money than they would have if they followed legitimate business practices. Marriott was here. From my understanding, they were a good corporate neighbor. Virginia was clearly interested in grabbing a victory, and they started putting money on the table. And Maryland had the match. It's a poker game, you know, who can outbid who and who's got the bluff. Eventually, I guess about 6 or 7 weeks ago, it came to light after the deal was closed that Virginia knew 4 weeks before it was announced that they were out of the running. I think it leads to a lot of bad policy. I think Marriott received more money than they would have if we would have followed even business practices from 25 years ago. And the people who lose are the taxpayers.
Pinsky successfully attached an amendment to the Marriott funding bill that requires the governor's economic development chief to attempt to negotiate an interstate compact and possibly seek federal legislation so that companies will no longer be able to pit state against state. But when asked what his amendment will really accomplish, Pinsky is modest.
It's unclear what it will actually accomplish. I wanted to raise the flag that we've got to stop. We've got to look and see whether this is really going to solve our long-term problems. Because if you have each state bidding against each other, ultimately the states with the biggest coffers, probably the larger populations, are going to outbid the smaller states. That's how it works. Two people play poker, it's usually the person who's got the bigger pot to fall back on who's going to win ultimately. What I tried to do in the amendment is to say that we should pursue regional pacts among states to say, let's stop this bidding war, let's stop trying to pull from each other, because ultimately the recipient is going to drive up the price for all of us and everybody's going to lose. And barring that, to look to our national legislature, the Congress, and our representative from Maryland, Senator Sarbanes-Mikulski and the congressional delegation, to potentially seek national legislation to put some clamps on this so it doesn't get out of hand, because it already is. Because ultimately, everyone loses. Because if you play this out, not just between Maryland and Virginia, but you add in Tennessee and Georgia and Mississippi playing off against each other, some states have lower labor costs. They pay people less. They have lower environmental standards. And I'd be very concerned that those pressures, if they come to bear, that people in Maryland will start saying, particularly in the business community, well, if we lower our environmental standards, we might be able to keep this company. Or if we can lower our wage standards, we might be able to keep this company. And ultimately, if you play that out to the nth degree, the culture and environment that we're fairly proud of in Maryland, we have a lot of positives to offer, is going to have this kind of reverse spiral downwards. And everybody loses, where in fact we should be trying to improve environmental standards, working conditions, wages across the country, improve schools in Mississippi so they're as good as Fairfax or Montgomery County. So I think that's why I put the amendment in, is to raise the consciousness, raise the education, and raise that question, that debate, so we don't keep going down this road.
There's been a lot of discussion in Congress and other places about trying to prevent these wars going between states. And what I'll say about Marriott is in my opinion, that did not happen. They went and looked at their financial situation if they were in Virginia versus Maryland. Because of the structure of their business, there were some significant tax advantages to them to be in Virginia over a number of years. And they came to us and said, we want to stay in Maryland. We're going to need some help. We provided that help. And what I appreciate about Marriott was they didn't take our offer and go to Virginia and say, okay, top this. They took our offer and said, this does it for us. We don't want to get in a bidding war, and we're just going to negotiate exclusively with Maryland. So they were very professional during all of this.
On the other hand, they got the best deal in history from the state of Maryland and from the county, right?
Well, no. I think the Baltimore Ravens got the best deal in the state of Maryland history, and I keep reminding people of that. But we got a very good deal, too. We're going to get a lot of money. And in downtown Silver Spring, we're going to get a tremendous amount of money also.
Say the Marriott deal pays off for the county in Maryland, as Doug Duncan projects. Still, what kind of precedent does it establish? Will a county and state simply bend over whenever a company raises the specter of locating elsewhere? Montgomery County Economic Development Director David Edgerly doesn't blame Marriott for exploring relocation to Virginia. Edgerly says Marriott had a fiduciary duty to its shareholders to get the best deal it could for itself. But if that's true for Marriott, then it's equally true for every other company. And if those other companies now walk away from talks with Maryland and county officials empty-handed, they're bound to be resentful. That's bad for the business climate. On the other hand, if they walk away with $63,000 per new job created, what will be left in the state and local coffers?
So anytime we're giving tax breaks, it's an expenditure, and we have to decide, is that the best way to spend our money? Because it might mean money is going to be taken from category X to pay for category Y. It might mean money from schools. It might mean money from the poorest of the poor who are barely hanging on in the safety net. So I don't think we can be cavalier about these tax breaks. And I think, unfortunately, for too long, at least the last 10 years, a lot of people in Maryland who want to attract business at any cost have been fairly cavalier about these tax breaks.
Senator Pinsky doesn't suggest that Governor Glendening supported the Marriott deal as some sort of political quid pro quo. After all, J.W. Bill Marriott hosted a fundraiser in Virginia for Glendening's GOP foe, Ellen Sauerbrey, in the last governor's race. Maryland is hardly unique in offering big corporations big deals. In 1992, South Carolina gave BMW an incentives package equal to some $68,000 for each job the automaker pledged to create. Alabama topped that by offering another German car maker, Daimler-Benz, a package worth as much as $200,000 per job created. And so it goes as well in Minnesota.
Oh, we've had this problem for years and years with respect to economic development. I was on the Economic Development Board in my home community, and we would regularly see companies come through and they'd say, you know, if you'd build us a building and do this and that, we would consider locating here. Well, we knew that that was because South Dakota was offering something, or Iowa, or maybe another community in Minnesota. More recently, we've gone through this experience with the Twins baseball team, which incidentally used to be the Washington Senators, but the Twins baseball team would like to have a new stadium. Well, the Triad area in North Carolina was apparently going to offer to build them a stadium at a very minimal cost. So they were saying to the state of Minnesota, the people of Minnesota, we need $250, $300 million from you for this stadium, or give us a stadium without charge. It turned out that North Carolina had a referendum, and they voted down the new stadium in the Winston-Salem area, so the Twins are still in Minneapolis, and we still face this problem with the professional sports stadium issue.
Minge has introduced a bill in Congress which is intended to discourage the use of tax dollars to, in his words, hijack a business from one community to another, or to allow corporations to blackmail communities into giving them large tax subsidies to stay. Minge says that the Minnesota legislature and the legislatures of some 10 other states have petitioned Congress to enact the type of law he's introduced.
Well, the bill is not a flat-out prohibition. It does have three types of limitations or provisions that would discourage the use of this type of a tax subsidy. First place, it subjects the subsidy to a tax itself. It's an excise tax that would be equal to the corporate income tax, so that the corporation or the recipient would have that tax bill at the U.S. Treasury. Secondly, it prohibits state and local governments from issuing municipal bonds and then having the interest on those bonds free from federal income tax if the proceeds are used to hijack or sort of bring a try to garner a business, steal a business from another state or community. And third, it prohibits the use of any federal funds by state and local government for that type of purpose.
But currently you have no co-sponsors.
Well, I have not been pushing the bill as aggressively as I ought to. We have a lot of things going on in the office, but I have worked with the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis, which really took this on as a Federal Reserve project to do the economic research, to hold forums around the country. And that particular effort is one that I tapped into. And I developed the legislation in consultation with the legal staff and the economists at that Federal Reserve Bank. And at this point, they are helping me promote the bill around the country, and so are some of the economic development societies or professional organizations.
Minge, known as an economic conservative, recently announced plans to seek Republican Rod Graham's U.S. Senate seat. In a state with a vibrant populist tradition, Minnesota's other senator is Paul Wellstone, Minge might see this bill as a way to shore up his standing with progressives before the Democratic primary. Even so, he pitches the bill as good for business.
My read is that business would probably support it, because they recognize that within a particular community or a county, whatever the taxing jurisdiction is, that in fact you would have a shift of tax dollars to that is to them. Let's say that it's Marriott. It's going to be a shift of some of the burden of supporting local services from the Marriott site to other businesses in the community. And they don't really like the idea of having to pick up the tab for another company, especially if that company is highly successful and really has the resources to pay its fair share of the tax bill.
While the prospects for federal legislation look dim now, both Representative David Minge and Maryland Senator Paul Pinsky see the corporate-sponsored economic war among the states as a growing problem, a problem that politicians ignore at their own peril. Still to come, the pros and amateurs of baseball, singer-songwriter Mary Sue Toohey, a preview of Lumina Studios' Shakespeare Summer Fair The Tempest, and the making of a community newspaper Tacoma style. But first, poet Lori Tsang, accompanied by Antonio Parker on sax and Leland Nakamura on drums. It's called Lunching.
The light, soft as late afternoon sun filtered through the screen door, draws you in to the three girls centered in the upper part of the frame. The photograph is torn and faded, yet they demand your attention, lined up like stair steps, straight as soldiers, regal as princesses. The eldest, proud and impassive. The middle one, thoughtful and inquisitive. The littlest, the artist's mother, a hint of defiance held firmly in the stubborn set of her mouth. Sepia-toned arms and knees peek out from crisp white cotton. Willful waves of hair are disciplined by supple fabric bows. Their features bear witness to history, maintain the integrity of their ancestry, African, Chinese, Jamaican. Savor this moment, captured in the blink of a mind's eye, an offering, frozen in time like the totems framing the photograph. The sun-bleached skull bone of some small beast, tiny doll-like figures gleaming like ebony, spotted feathers soft as a sigh, cowries with dark slotted mouths closing protectively around hidden mysteries. The tight, dry bud of a rose, still unopened, the light reflecting white off the tiny thorns adorning its brittle, delicate stem. Fallen petals the color of dried blood. Crystal droplets glistening on the glossy cheeks of dead leaves. Raindrops or tears. A knife and fork stand guard on the right, the engraved silver dark and tarnished, the ivory handles cracked and yellowing with age. They are not weapons, but a reminder, this is our heritage, a ritual meal, a feast for the spirit. The light weaves its way in and out of the shadows, drawing the rough texture of burlap out of the shadows, the coarse strands of our past and separate journeys woven loosely into the fabric of a nation's destiny. A tablecloth draped over an altar. Worship here. Feast on this. Nourish yourself on this ancestral dialogue and replenish your soul. Worship here. Feast on this. Nourish yourself on this ancestral dialogue and replenish your soul.
Hi and welcome to Body and Soul. Contrary to popular belief, the sport of baseball is not about to fall into a hole and bury itself. Forget about the O's. Actually, let's forget about the majors. we have two popular minor league teams on this side of the Potomac and another on the other side. Plus, we now have the Big Train, a new team based in a new stadium in Bethesda. Close to home, family entertainment, and some players who are good enough to think about playing someday in the bigs. Ross Adams reports.
Will soon ring out in this new stadium at Cabin John Regional Park. A semi-pro team made up of college players is being fielded as part of the Collegiate Wooden Bat Summer League. In college, they only use aluminum bats.
It's going to be really good baseball at an affordable price at a really nice place.
Thomas is a driving force behind the new team. He's a fan of the game, and the team will be named in honor of his grandfather, Washington Senators great Walter Big Train Johnson. In addition to providing some good semi-pro baseball, Thomas wants to improve the places where children in the area play ball.
Our mission is to raise money to build and maintain youth baseball facilities in Montgomery County and to a lesser extent in the District of Columbia. There's a great need for that.
The team will play in this new stadium, which is near completion. The 800-seat facility is named in honor of the late Washington Post columnist Shirley Povich. Organizers have raised $500,000 to fund the team. Derek Hakopian will coach the ball club. So far, he's recruited about 30 players from Division I schools around the nation.
It's an absolute must for any serious college player to play in a league like this. This is the only way to get better.
But Hakopian acknowledges that only 4 or 5 of these players will ever be offered a pro contract, and only 1 or 2 will make it to the big leagues.
We believe the quality of play will be slightly below that of professional ball.
In any case, Thomas hopes that young fans like these will have improved opportunities to play the game they love. For the Coffee House, I'm Ross Adams.
Thank you, Ross. So, okay, let's be glad that baseball fans are still coming to the park. But let's also admit that the role baseball once played in the hearts and minds of a community has changed. In the studio with me is Rob Ruck, a wonderful baseball historian who's written extensively about the old days, which were not always good, but maybe were more interesting, more important. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, Howard.
Hi, thanks for joining us. Talking about the differences, let me guess off the top that here we have the Big Train, semi-pros from all over the country, paid performers. The old days, sandlot baseball, these were guys up from the roots. Yes?
Back in the early part of the century, when sandlot ball was more important than professional baseball in most cities and towns, the teams came from neighborhoods. They came from workplaces. They came from the people themselves. These teams are similar in some ways, but still light years away.
Yeah, I mean, they're really paid performers in the more than guys you grew up with or I grew up with, or I mean, they're not of us nearly as much, I would say.
I mean, if you can't play, I think sport matters the most to you when the people you're watching are people you know,
Right.
people you live with, people you work with.
You've written about this and studied it, obviously, and you've also provided us with this wonderful clip which takes us back to the beginning, the turn of the century. And we're going to show this clip here in a minute. Maybe you can explain. This is about the Homestead Grays, a team from Pittsburgh, where you're from?
Right. The Grays were formed by a bunch of African-American men who worked at the Homestead Works of what became U.S. Steel. They didn't play for pay. They played because they loved the game, and they became quite good at it. Eventually, they became a semi-professional and a professional club. Were part of the Negro Leagues. During World War II, they played 3 games a week at Griffith Stadium in D.C. During those years, from 1937 to 1945, they won 9 Negro League championships in a row. Now, clearly they were great baseball teams, but I think what was most important about those teams was what they meant to people in Homestead and Pittsburgh.
All right, well, let's come back to that, but first, this is narrated by Ozzie Davis, and so let's take a look.
At the turn of the century, Homestead, Pennsylvania was the kingpin of Andrew Carnegie's empire of iron and steel. The nation knew it best as the site of the bloody 1892 shootout between striking workers and the company's Pinkerton detectives. The black community that formed there did more than simply labor in Carnegie's mills. In 1900, Homestead's black steel workers formed a ball club that would become a sporting legend.
When Homestead Grays played, it was considered an event for our group, you know. So then, of course, all the ladies would get their husbands to take them out and whatnot to see the Homestead Grays.
When you're talking about Homestead, there's only one primary factor. You had to think about that mill that stretched about 3 miles along the Monongahela River, Homestead, Pennsylvania. And most blacks worked in that Homestead mill. It was the town, and when you tied that in with the Homestead Grays, you're talking about one of the prized possessions of the black community, the Homestead Grays Baseball Club.
Working class, that's what comes to mind here. The Sandlot teams were out of the workplace, as you said, right?
Out of the workplace, out of the immigrant neighborhoods, out of black neighborhoods. You know, for somebody to take off work and to go see a ball game was a difficult proposition. And for men who labored in the Homestead mills, working in those days 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, you weren't going to go to Forbes Field. You were going to play ball in your community.
And so that there was a, as you say, what changed then, the big leagues were almost a foreign concept. There was like going off to visit Disneyland or something, as I guess is what you're saying. And so the attention was all local. And then something changed, obviously. And I'll guess that it was TV.
Mm-hmm. I mean, between World War I and World War II, sandlot ball matters more to people in Pittsburgh than the Pirates. Sandlot football matters more than the Steelers. But after World War II, when television enters, sandlot clubs die relatively quickly. So does minor league baseball, local fight clubs. And a lot of new capitals entering into professional sport. Mm-hmm. And the old families are leaving. You know, 40 years later, of course, it's media companies.
Yes, right. I mean, right. Of course, it's huge business. I mean, it's $800 million for the Redskins, as we all know locally, but it's huge at the professional level. But I'm wondering, does the pendulum begin to swing back? If we see the big train now, not really sandlot ball, not industrial league, but a place to take the family. Does that warm your heart at all?
Well, you know, I think it's a stretch to think that we're going to get rid of Rupert Murdoch and Disney and Comcast mm-hmm. and the folks that are increasingly running sport. But I think as this area and a lot of other areas have witnessed, there's still a lot of grassroots sport. People who organize their own teams and leagues, not because they're particularly interested in making money off it or seeing kids become professionals, but because they love to see everybody have a chance to play.
So your advice is to concentrate on what really is homegrown, which are the kid leagues or the adult co-ed leagues that where you play with people you know and people you work with, or your neighbors and your friends, co-workers.
Well, I think if you're interested in the sense of community that sport can offer, that's where you probably want to focus.
And and what do we get as a community out of something like a semi-pro league, or we just get watered down Rupert Murdoch?
I don't think so. I mean, I think most of the kids will play in that league. Pretty soon we'll forget about the chance of playing in the majors. But this is a great opportunity for them. I mean, and hopefully it'll be a fun thing for people to watch.
To go out and see.
As long as they don't lose sight of what they're trying to do.
Right.
It's playing that matters here.
And you to go to these small parks, of course, you can go up and touch the players, talk to them before the games. I mean, there's a certain informality and proximity that's, I think, nice to break down for the kids too. Is there, you know, should we, though, try to recreate, do you think, the old days somehow? Try harder to bring back working place sports?
Well, you know, I doubt if it can replicate the old forms, but I think if people put energy into their own sporting lives and building in their community and neighborhood what seems to work and what seems natural for those situations, then they'll be healthier, people will be meeting in positive ways, and I think they'll probably get more out of sport than heading down to the ballpark.
Fair enough, fair enough. Well, the big train starts, I think, the season in June and July. And Rob, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Howard.
I'm Howard Cohn, and this has been Body and Soul.
Just ahead, singer-songwriter Mary Sue Toohey, a preview of The Tempest, and Inside the Tacoma Voice newspaper.
For the rain to come and bring me down to the earth, 'cause I can't seem to stop thinking of you, wishing you could not stop thinking of me. Hey, hey. Rain on me, rain on you. Wake me with tears in the afternoon. Oh, rain on me, rain on you. Wake me with tears, wake me with tears, wake me with tears in the afternoon. Settle into a cloud and collect all my thoughts of you and wrap them all around you, but you are nowhere to be found. Hey, 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 hey. Rain on me, rain on you. Wake me with tears in the afternoon. Oh, rain on me, rain on you. Wake me with tears, wake me with tears, wake me with tears in the afternoon. And the days turn around in 2 years, and my life is a rambling, dusty back road, and you are nowhere to be found, but the lesson
you.
Mary Sue,
Yes.
you're here. How long have you been performing?
Well, technically since 1991.
Okay.
So.
And I think when we were talking earlier, you had a rather interesting first run-in with a live audience and a microphone. Can you, let's go into that.
Yes.
Because people do wonder, you know.
Well, it's a great story. I was in South Dakota having an open mic experience. If anybody's done an open mic, they know what that is. And I had never performed with my guitar in front of anybody, so I went out to this open mic. I didn't know anybody at all, so that's the best way to do it. Went out there, played not even a whole song. I had to stop the song because something had technical difficulties. I don't know, words left me, I'm not sure. And the audience clapped. I couldn't believe it.
And that was it. It was all uphill from there.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now you played some other instruments before coming to the guitar and thinking of yourself as a contemporary singer-songwriter. What else did you play? This is good that we let our viewers know this, because they, not everybody starts with a guitar in their hand at age 5 or something.
Actually, my big brother played the trumpet, and I admired him so I took up with the trumpet. And I was horrible, so then I went to the French horn. That was difficult. So then I went to the saxophone, baritone, then alto, and then settled on tenor sax.
Yeah.
Loved it. Loved tenor sax.
You played that for a number of years. Have your musical background there.
Pretty much, yeah.
And then in '91, was that a song that you wrote?
Yes, I was beginning my songwriting at that time.
And basically all the songs that you're out performing, you're not doing many covers.
Correct.
Cool. What was the name of that song that you did to open with?
That was called Rain on Me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's on a CD, which we'll mention later.
Yes.
Or again, I guess we'd say. How about another one from that?
Okay.
Thanks.
A single phrase on a page. I have no words to say to you. There are only ashes where the flames once burned, where the flames once burned, where the flames once burned. You took the back door out my heart, such an easy road for you, and a harder road for me, and a harder road for you. I don't know if I'll ever understand why you never said goodbye. Instead, you just don't call. No, you just don't care. No, you just don't care. You took the back door at my heart, such an easy road for you, and a harder road for me, and a harder road for you. I wouldn't know you if I passed you on the street. Our lives have been so separate. so long. I am only a relic of your past, with no breath and no fire and no life of my own. You took the back door out my heart, such an easy road for you, and a harder road for me, and a harder road for you.
If by your heart, my dearest father, you have put the elements in this war, allay them.
The sky seems to pour down stinking pitch.
How did the sea mounting to the welkin's cheek dashes the fire out?
Oh, I have suffered with those that I saw suffer.
A brave vessel,
Who had no doubts a noble creature in her. Split all to pieces.
oh, they cried back against my very heart.
Her souls they perish.
Be collected, no more amazement. Tell your piteous heart there's no harm done.
Oh, woe the day.
No harm. I have done nothing but in care of thee, my dear ones, thee, my daughters.
Where should this music be?
Those pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him that doth fade.
In the air or in the earth?
But doth suffer a sea change.
It sounds no more.
Into something rich and strange.
No, it begin again.
Sea nymphs hourly ring his knell. Hark! Now I hear them. Ding, dong, bell.
How beauteous mankind is. Oh, brave your world that hath such creatures in it.
These are actors, as I foretold you. We're all spirits, and are melted into air. Thin air. And like the great globe itself, and all which it inherit shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made of.
Welcome to Writer's Block. The independent newspaper is a publication most of us are familiar with. We reach for it when we want news about ourselves and our community. It can reflect our values, our conflicts, and our ideals. And the independent newspaper has a special role to play apart from the larger press in the sense that it is a more intimate medium designed to speak to its readers with the expectation that they will talk back. The Tacoma Voice is one example of this. And with me to discuss its role as independent newspaper is Editor-in-Chief Eric Bond and writer Nancy O'Donnell. Eric Bond was born in Silver Spring, Maryland. Nancy O'Donnell was born in Rochester, New York. And today they both reside in Tacoma Park. I should mention that they are also married to each other. Welcome to the coffee house.
Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome. What sets the Tacoma Voice apart in terms of the independent newspaper?
Well, there aren't very many independent newspapers at all left. I mean, a lot of the local papers that you see nowadays, you might assume are independent, aren't actually run by a member of the community, but are owned by some larger conglomerate. So, for example, the Washington Post has a series of local papers around Washington called the Gazette, and each community has one, but it's not an independent paper. It's not put out by somebody who lives in the community. And this is a trend that kind of has gone across the country. So that a daily paper, for example, would run off kind of a weekly or monthly version of itself for local communities. So we're kind of a dying type of a medium, really.
And yet you are flourishing. How many years have you been running The Voice?
I've been running it, I guess, about 5 years.
But it was begun in 87.
87,
right. So it's hanging.
It's been around, yeah. And it's probably about the fifth or sixth newspaper of Tacoma Park.
Okay. I guess that's what interests me is how it reflects Tacoma Park. Nancy, you do a section called Talk of Tacoma. I mean, how is that separate from, say, another community?
Well, because I'm part of the community, I have access to more of the secrets in the community. I don't know that I think there's different stories that I will cover that, say, something like the Gazette wouldn't cover. Just recently, we had Roscoe the Rooster.
Right.
Some of it might sound silly, but I mean, this is what people are talking about. We had this free-range rooster who was in Tacoma Park for 10, 12 years.
Illegally.
Illegally, yeah. He was living on somebody's lawn, and we noticed him. He was a fixture on Carroll Avenue. And then one day...
The city had a bounty out on his head.
The city had a bounty out on his head. They could never track him down. He escaped dogs and cats and the whole citizens, small children chasing him. And then just recently, right after, in winter, he was found squashed on the road, and there was a big memorial service for him, and
only in
with
Tacoma
bagpipe and everything. But it's not just the crazy part of Tacoma Park. It's I mean, it's filled with artists and writers, and I'm writing something about Mike Tidwell, who just received a big award as a travel writer. So different things like that. So I don't know that it's. I mean, it's different because it deals with topics that other newspapers wouldn't find important.
Well, it's like you said in the opening. I mean, an independent paper has an intimacy with the community that you don't see in other papers. So, Roscoe seems kind of like this kind of goofy thing maybe to people who don't live in Tacoma Park. But if you live in Tacoma Park and you've seen Roscoe cross your path, a couple of times a week, then he means something, and it's a neighborhood thing.
Right.
And reporting on that becomes as important as going to the elected officials and finding out what news they have.
Sometimes it's more important.
More important. Well, exactly. I mean, but that's your sort of goal, isn't it, to reflect the community's identity and how it feels about itself.
Right. And I guess it was about 3 years ago that Nancy started writing Talk of Tacoma, and that was, I guess there was 1 month that we just seemed to have a lot of these. They weren't long stories. They weren't, big exposés, 3,000 words, anything like that. But things that were happening in people's lives, in people's neighborhoods, that were worth, stories that were worth telling. And we put them all together into a page, and it just kind of kept going after that. I mean, every month, you know, there are how many stories that just kind of crop up. They're not going to make it into other newspapers, but they're important, and they're important to the people who are living those stories.
Right. I would imagine that there's a challenge in that, though, in the sense that you're writing about your community, our community, and you're writing about people who may even be your neighbors, who live with you or who you've worked with before. I mean, how do you deal with it when, for instance, a story doesn't go the way someone wants to be represented? Or
that can be very difficult because, as you say, you're maintaining friendships, and I think they are more suspicious. I've been at parties where I'm just coming over to have a few words with somebody, and they'll say, you know, watch out, it's the voice, and so that's uncomfortable. Yeah, but I mean, I think that I think there's an ethos of the paper that's kind and that's concerned about the community. It's not a feeling that we're you know, we're better than they are, or we're cooler than they are, and so I think that that makes a difference. So there was a case where I was writing about somebody in the city, and you know, as I was interviewing her, it was obvious that she didn't know what she was talking about, or she was making more and more mistakes, and I was uncomfortable about it. Now I could have you know, taken verbatim. I could have written what she, you know, the interview, but I didn't do that. I actually called her back the next day and said, you know, now when you said that, is this what you meant? Because in a sense, I felt sorry for her, but you know, I don't think, you know, I know that if I worked for another newspaper, you know, I wouldn't be doing that. I wouldn't be allowed to do that. But I like that I can do that at The Voice.
Well, the thing that's interesting, I mean, I think that Talk of Tacoma reflects kind of the positive stories in the community, and we have so many good positive stories. But what's strange in Tacoma Park is that, you know, streetlights, something like streetlights becomes a divisive issue, or parking on your street.
Or lawnmowers.
Or
basketball hoops.
And so you simply can't write about, you know, even the smallest issues without making people upset, you know.
Which is also must be a challenge since the two of you are married. I mean, not only are you dealing with neighbors and the community, but you're also dealing with each other in terms of this paper. So how do you, I mean, how does that work? Or what do you,
how does that work, Eric?
How does that work?
Well, you know, I mean, well, in terms of things like news, I mean, we generally agree editorially. We have the same.
Is that right, Nancy?
No, that's true.
No, that's true. We have the same politics. We basically do. I mean, I mean, when the thing with the city official, I mean, he didn't say, well, no, you've got to print it. He said, you know, like call her back or whatever. So we do agree on so many things.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I do think that we share values, and there's the personal politics that I think any couple that is in business together would have. I mean, if we were running a store, you know, I'd be wanting to put the can of peas somewhere, and Nancy would want to put them somewhere else. I mean, you know, you have.
But that's the challenge, isn't it? And that you've got different ideas. I mean, our community is about diversity and even the eccentric occurrence from time to time, and I would imagine that must come up between the two of you too.
Right. Well, you know when there are problems when you don't see my byline as often as you normally would. I mean, some people. So you can look.
So one month there's 7 stories by Nancy.
And the next month there's 1
What do you have
or
to
none.
do, Nancy, to get those stories in?
Well, no. She can always get the stories in, but she may be, you know, deciding not to write any stories because she's disagreeing with something I've done.
I see.
I don't get paid enough.
But she is the
for
best
this kind
writer
of
for the paper,
aggravation.
and yes, and I don't. You know, that's a frequent topic because I'm the one in charge of
payroll,
and sometimes, you know, I have to balance a lot of things, and it's unfortunately in a family it's easier not to pay your wife sometimes than to pay the printing bill.
I understand. Yeah, but it is quite a challenge, I would imagine, all seriousness.
Right. No, seriously, it is.
It's not
it's difficult.
the easiest thing in the world sometimes. So, no, what are your goals? What do you see? Where do you see The Voice going in terms of, I mean, do you have a model of the way you want the paper to?
I mean, it's great to have a name like The Voice, you know, which I inherited. Lou DeSabla, who started the paper, came up with the name, but it's a great name for what we really believe in. I mean, it's a voice of the community, and it means that, you know, it's really many voices. We have a very open letters policy, for example. Anybody who has an opinion, we will try to give them space in the paper for it, and we often give space for things that, you know, maybe we wouldn't put on a storyboard, but they're important to other people in the community. So it's very important. That's a big part of the philosophy of the paper. And then we have a quotation on the cover, which is "The truth is rarely pure and never simple," which is a quotation from Oscar Wilde. Which I think reflects, you know, our philosophy that, you know, we don't want to become so arrogant as to think that our newspaper is going to present the truth.
Right.
You know, it presents, you know, different sides of the truth.
Right.
And if you disagree, please write in, and will present your side of the truth. I mean, it's a complicated thing. I mean, even, you know, some of the things we're talking about, you know, street lights or whatever, people have different points of view, and I think that's a very important part of where I think we're coming from. We're not trying to tell people what the truth is. We're trying to reflect the different truths that we see in the community.
In fact, the letters to the editors section actually got us sued once.
Oh, really?
Because someone had written a letter to the editor and called someone, one of her neighbors, a yuppie lawyer. And it went, I think he sued for like $1 million, and
wow.
Luckily he lost.
Maryland Supreme Court.
Oh my goodness.
The, you know, and whether or not that person was in fact a yuppie lawyer, we came out.
It's a fine line, isn't it? The
Yeah.
freedom of the press and just, anyway, we are running out of time. That was quick, wasn't it? That about does it for us. Thanks to Eric Bond and Nancy O'Donnell of the Tacoma Voice for joining me in the coffee house. I'm Lisa Page, and this has been Writer's Block.
That's it for the May edition. See you next month in the Coffee House.